The flashing red and blue lights streaked across the darkened fields, their glow bouncing off the weathered metal of the old barn. The air hung heavy with the scent of freshly cut hay, and the distant chirping of crickets filled the night. But all that faded beneath the piercing voice of the woman standing next to the patrol car. Arms crossed tightly over her chest, her nose wrinkled as if the very existence of the farm offended her, Lisa declared. I told you. This place is a blight on the community. The animals are a threat, it's filthy, and I'd bet my last dollar something illegal's going on here if you dig deep enough. Her tone dripped with smug satisfaction. The officer, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, held a clipboard, jotting notes with a bored expression. I leaned against the fence, arms folded, watching the scene unfold with a smirk I didn't bother to hide. This wasn't Lisa's first stunt, but it was easily her most absurd yet. The officer cleared his throat. Sir, we got a complaint about this property. Something about, he squinted at his notes. Aggressive animals, zoning issues, and an unauthorized structure? Lisa's face lit up like she'd hit the jackpot. Yes, that disgusting barn. It's an eyesore, it reeks, and it's dragging down property values. It has to go. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You called 911 over my barn? I asked, incredulous. She jabbed a finger at me, practically vibrating with indignation. It's not just a barn. It's a cesspool of disease. I've had it. My dog was almost mauled by one of those beasts you keep on this so-called farm. I didn't need to ask to know she meant Clover, my notoriously ornery goat who loved terrorizing small dogs. I'd told Lisa before to keep her yappy little mutt off my land, but she never listened. The officer sighed, shifting his weight, clearly regretting this call. I could tell he'd already pegged Lisa as a nuisance. Look, I said, straightening up. I could explain why everything she's saying is garbage, but it'd be quicker if I just made a call. Lisa let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Oh, please. Call whoever you want. I'm within my rights to report this. The HOA has rules, and you're breaking them. That's when I started enjoying myself. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and dialed. It rang once before a deep, gravelly voice answered. Yeah. Hey, Uncle Tom, I said casually. Mind swinging by? We've got a situation. A pause, then a groan. Tell me it's not Lisa again. Oh, it's Lisa again. A chuckle. I'll be there in 5. I hung up, slipping the phone back into my pocket. Lisa stood there, arms still crossed, waiting for me to explain myself. You think you can call your little farm buddies and intimidate me? She sneered. That won't work. The law's the law. I grinned. Couldn't agree more. That's why I called the sheriff. It took her a second to register what I'd said. Her eyes widened slightly, her posture faltering. What? What do you mean, the sheriff? My uncle, I replied, savoring the way her face paled. Sheriff Tom. He's on his way. The officer looked relieved. Lisa looked like she'd swallowed a brick. I let the silence linger, watching her confidence erode. It wasn't just that she'd called the cops over nothing. It was that she'd picked the wrong guy to mess with. I had roots here deeper than she could imagine. This farm came from my granddad, who'd worked the land for decades. It sat just outside the HOA's fancy neighborhood, technically beyond their reach, but that never stopped Lisa from acting like she owned the place. From the day I moved in, she'd shown up with her clipboard, rattling off complaints. The fence was too tall, the compost smelled, the animals were disruptive. I'd just sipped my coffee and said, Lisa, it's a farm. But reason wasn't her forte. When she couldn't bully me into compliance, she escalated. Letters, HOA lackeys, complaints to the city, health department, animal control. I shut her down every time, and every time, she got madder. Now here we were. She shifted nervously, probably wondering if she could still spin this. Before she could decide, a second patrol car rolled up. Out stepped Sheriff Tom, a bear of a man with a badge and a look of utter exhaustion. He glanced at me, then Lisa, then the officer. Let me guess, he said. She called 911 over some nonsense emergency? Lisa straightened, hands on hips. Sheriff, this property is a danger to the neighborhood. That man's breaking HOA rules. Tom raised a hand, cutting her off. HOA rules don't apply here. But, and, he continued, louder, you called 911 again over nothing. Lisa's mouth flapped like a fish out of water. This is a serious issue. Tom turned to the officer. What's the supposed crime? The officer hesitated. Aggressive livestock. I nearly laughed. Tom exhaled hard, then faced Lisa with a stare that could stop a charging bull. You know calling in a fake emergency is a crime, right? She flinched, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. I smiled. This was going to be good. Her face turned beet red, jaw clenched so tight I thought she'd crack a molar. She'd been so sure that dialing 911 with her wild story would ruin me. Now, with Sheriff Tom, my uncle, standing there, she saw her mistake. I was just worried about the neighborhood's safety, she stammered. This place is a dump. Animals roaming free, that awful smell. Tom silenced her with a raised hand, a faint smirk tugging at his lips as he glanced at me. You called 911 over a smell? Lisa faltered, her bravado slipping. It's more than that. There are dangerous animals. You mean Clover? I cut in. Right on cue, my goat poked her head out from behind the barn, as if she knew she was the star of this drama. Lisa recoiled, glaring at her like she was a rabid wolf. She attacked my dog. Your dog trespassed, I said with a shrug. Clover doesn't like uninvited guests. The young officer fought to keep a straight face. Tom, though, didn't bother. He crossed his arms and sighed. Lisa, this is the third time you've dragged emergency services out here over nothing. It's not nothing, she shrieked. He's violating HOA rules. This place is a disaster, tanking property values. He's running some shady operation, and I won't stand for it. Tom pinched the bridge of his nose. For the last time, this farm isn't under HOA control. You've got no say here. Her eye twitched. That can't be right. It has to follow community rules. I pulled out my phone, opened my property deed, and showed her the screen. Read it yourself. This land's been outside HOA jurisdiction since before your neighborhood existed. Granddad made sure of it. She snatched the phone, scanning it with growing fury, then shoved it back at me. That doesn't mean it's safe. It needs inspections, health violations, anything. Tom stepped in. Lisa, you're not the law. You don't decide what's safe outside your HOA. She was floundering now, desperation clear. This isn't fair. He's harassing the HOA, ignoring our notices, refusing to cooperate. And you're letting him off. I grinned. You mean those fake notices with no legal weight? Yeah, I ignored those. You've been warned repeatedly, she screeched. The HOA can enforce standards, and you're violating them. Tom raised a brow. Again, this land isn't yours to control. Her fists balled up, trembling with rage. I don't care about your technicalities. This farm's a disgrace, it's disruptive, and it needs to shut down. Tom's patience snapped. His voice dropped low and steady. Lisa, do you understand what happens when you file a false police report? Her eyes flickered with doubt. This wasn't false. You claimed a crime, he interrupted. There's no crime. You wasted police time. That's illegal. Her face drained of color. Wait, what are you saying? Tom flipped open a notepad. This is your third strike, misusing 911. That's a pattern. I could push for fines or charges. You wouldn't, she whispered. He stared her down. Wouldn't I? Silence hung thick. Lisa's mouth opened and shut, grasping for an escape. This isn't right, she said weakly. I was helping the community. Tom sighed. Last chance, Lisa. Leave now, and don't call 911 again unless it's real. Next time, I'll make sure you face the consequences. Her jaw clenched, but she spun on her heel and stormed to her car. This isn't over, she spat, glaring back at me. I grinned. Oh, I hope not. These chats are a blast. She slammed her door and peeled out, gravel flying. Tom turned to me, exhausted. You enjoy riling her up, don't you? I shrugged. It's a pastime. The officer stifled a laugh. If that's all, we'll head out, he said. Tom nodded. Yeah, we're done. As they drove off, he leaned out his window. If she's back, don't engage. Call me. I saluted lazily. Will do, Sheriff. A week passed without a peep from Lisa. Odd, since she usually couldn't last 2 days without some new complaint. The quiet felt eerie. I knew she wasn't done. She was scheming. Sure enough, a letter arrived. Not an HOA nag, but an official document claiming my farm was under investigation for health and safety violations, complete with a fake city seal. Laughable, but it showed her desperation. Then Bill, a sensible neighbor who didn't buy Lisa's nonsense, showed up. She's lost it, he said. Emergency HOA meeting last night. She ranted for an hour about you being a menace, showed fake complaints she filed with the county, photos of trash and manure, anything to make this place look bad. I laughed. She's going low now. Worse, Bill said. She's got the HOA board considering a private investigator to dig up dirt, maybe even a lawsuit with HOA funds. I sighed. She wasn't quitting. If she could sway the board, she had more pull than I'd thought. She's in for a shock, I told Bill, then called Tom. She's at it again, I said, detailing the fake docs and investigator plan. He chuckled. She's making this too easy. I'll handle it. Hours later, I was feeding the animals when 2 cars pulled up to Lisa's house. Tom stepped out, followed by a suited guy, county official, I guessed. Lisa stormed onto her porch, unprepared. I couldn't hear them, but her face shifted from fury to panic as the suit handed her papers. She flailed, shouted, then froze when he said something that made her stagger. HOA members watched from afar, none stepping in. She slammed her door, defeated. Tom called later. Fraud, he said. Fake docs, misusing HOA funds, illegal. She's in deep. I grinned. Audit time. Oh yeah, he said. County's on it. She's been skimming funds for years. Days later, the HOA turned on her. Whispers of a vote to oust her as president grew. She fought. Emails, meetings, door-to-door pleas, but it was over. Bill reported she lost by a landslide and skipped town, humiliated. Peace settled over the farm. No more fake violations, no more Lisa. But I knew she'd be back. People like her never quit. 2 weeks later, she returned. I was fixing the fence when her car crept up. She stepped out, deflated, not the tyrant she'd been. This is your fault, she said quietly. I wiped my hands. Thought you did this to yourself. Her fire was gone. I just wanted a better neighborhood. For you? I said. No one else liked your reign. She slumped. They're scrapping my rules. Everything I built. Maybe it shouldn't have been there, I replied. She muttered. I gave the HOA everything, then turned and drove off. No drama, just defeat. That was the last I saw of her. The farm thrived in her absence. The HOA eased up, refunding her fines, including mine. Bill handed me a check. For getting rid of her, he said. I smirked. She did that herself. Months later, a letter claimed a zoning review, Lisa's handiwork. Tom laughed it off. County dismissed it. She's stirring trouble, but no one's biting. Days later, I caught her filming my land from the road. I recorded her back. Documenting, I said. She stormed off, beaten. She'd lost her power, her audience, her fight. No matter what she tried next, she'd never win.